right, who's happy to be in church today? Super exciting Sunday. My name is Bekah. I'm one of the pastors here at Green Valley, and I'm just humbled to get to continue the series that we've been in over the last couple of weeks called Missing Jesus. The first week, John talked about how we can miss Jesus in religion. And then the second week, last week, Scott talked about how we can miss Jesus in cults. And both of those talks are super good, informational, but vital talks for the times that we are living in. And so if you missed them or you haven't seen them, I encourage you to go onto our YouTube page and to watch those. And then this week, I'm going to be talking about missing Jesus in culture. Next week, we're going to do a panel with the three of us. And our goal is to just handle and answer some questions that come from you guys. And so we have an email address that you can send your questions to. It's called missingjesus@greenvalley.church. And if you have questions about the last two topics or this topic or just in general, please send those in to us because we're going to together, the three of us, tackle those next week in our panel. I've shared with those of you that have heard me speak before that I grew up as a missionary kid overseas. At the age of 6, my family moved over to Switzerland, and then we moved to Belgium, and then we have somebody's Swiss back there. And then we came back to the States, and we kind of hopped back and forth between these countries. And what I discovered and what I learned at a very young age is that there are very many different rules and ways of doing things depending on where you find yourself. And so as a kid at a very young age, I came face to face with differing cultures. And for our purposes today, I just want to give you a very short definition of what culture actually means. And this is what it means. Culture is how we do things here, okay? Have you ever found yourself in a new space and you kind of just butt up against the how we do things here, right? It can be fun, exhilarating, or intimidating, right? But I have this image for us to just get a little bit deeper understanding of what culture is. There are some parts of culture that are visible. They're easy for us to recognize. Things like artifacts, art or buildings or the ways that cities are laid out. There's behaviors that we can see in people and in people groups, or there's metrics, the ways that we measure things. But there's other things that are beneath the surface that tend to be a little bit invisible and sometimes harder to understand and harder to identify. And those tend to be beliefs, values, and assumptions. I have some examples of some cultural norms that I came face to face with when I was a child. When we moved to Switzerland, I got there late for the school year, and all of our stuff was packed up into these army tote things that my dad had gotten at a secondhand store, and we quickly threw them up in the attic, and we were trying to slowly move into our apartment, but I had to start school really quickly. And one of the parts of my education was that I needed to go to a swimming class. And so I couldn't find my swimming suit. I was in second grade, I was 6 years old, and so I told my teacher, I can't find my swimsuit. She was a very nice Swiss lady, and she said, no problem, I will provide you with a swimsuit. So the day came for swim class, got in the bus, went to the swim place, got out, and she hands me the swimsuit, and I go, where's the rest of it? She handed me bottoms only. Okay, and as the 6-year-old American child that I was, I knew that half of the swimsuit was missing because we do not only wear bottoms here. But the Swiss do. This is a normal thing for them. And so this was a new culture that I found myself in. When I moved to Belgium a little bit later, I quickly learned that you learn how to do life in the rain at all times because the climate in Belgium is 265 days of rain. And we have a term. Have you guys noticed kind of how it's been raining the last couple of days? When the weather can't decide if it's actually going to rain or if it just wants to spit at you, we have a name for that, and it's called belging. It's belging. And that is the kind of weather that I grew up in, and I had wet hair and wet jeans my whole entire childhood. When we moved back to Sacramento, this is what I encountered. The streets were humongous. I mean, you could fit 10 of our little European streets in one lane of an American highway, right? Or the stores were huge, and they had 50 varieties of everything that you could possibly want. And for a little girl who had been living overseas that didn't operate that way, this was a huge cultural shift for me, a different way of doing things around here. Well, here at Green Valley, we also have a culture. Right now, if you're in this room, you are sitting in an orange chair. And what you see is the orange chair, right? And what you might be feeling is a tad uncomfortable, let's be honest. But let's look at our graphic again. There is something, the chair is the artifact, right? The orange chair is our artifact. There's something beneath the surface for why we have these orange chairs. There is a set of beliefs and a set of values that we adhere to here at Green Valley that mean that we have these orange chairs. And that is this. This place is not a place for you to come and to sit and to plop and to get comfortable and never want to leave. This is a place that we believe God has given us to use to gather, to encourage, to connect, but then also to learn so that we can leave this place and go out there and challenge the status quo of our world, so that we can go out and be the church that God has called us to be, living into our mission, which is to love God and to love people. The truth is that all of us, every human being, has cultural habits. We're not always aware of them, and oftentimes we bring our cultural habits to the Bible. They're these deeply ingrained patterns of interpreting the world, and they shape, and sometimes, unfortunately, they can warp our interpretation and understanding of Scripture. And by extension, we also bring these cultural habits and apply them to our understanding of Jesus. All you have to do is go on Google and Google Jesus and see all of the different pictures of Jesus that are available on there. So if you're here today and you like basketball, we've got a Jesus for you. Maybe you're here today and you're a cowboy. We've got a Jesus for you. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this is actually Scott's favorite Jesus right here. But on a serious note, one of the most significant cultural habits that we have to contend with today in our understanding of Jesus is this. It's individualism. I read it put this way. Acting in one's own interests versus those of others is arguably the guiding principle of our time. The guiding principle of our time. Expressions of individualism are literally everywhere you look. And what happened was we had what was called the me generation, who gave birth to the super baby, the I generation. We have the selfie, which serves as the poster child for contemporary individualism. Did you know that if you go to Australia and you put your hand out like this with your camera and you gather people around you, this is actually something called an ussie. But if you come to the United States and you go like this with your camera and you gather people around you, it's still called a selfie. That should tell us something about our culture and the way that we perceive and understand and interact with the world. And the rise of individualism is actually showing no signs of reversing, and it's evolving into a global movement. It is something that we are actually exporting to the rest of the world. People all over the world rebuff external control in favor of this, in favor of sovereignty of the self. And the results of this are that people are more lonely than we have ever seen before. Life feels more empty and meaningless to people than it ever has before. And life cruelly seems more fleeting, even though we are living longer. So, if we live in a time where self-interest and individualism define our customs and how we understand and how we perceive and how we interact with each other in the world, I want us to just spend a few moments today and really ask this question. How are we missing the way of Jesus in all of this? The way that we counteract this cultural habit that we are in of individualism is three ways, and this is what we're going to talk about today, is to choose to follow Jesus and not self. It's to choose to give, not just get. And it is a choice to die so that you can live. And our big idea today is this: being countercultural in the world that tells us it's all about me means living a life that is all about him. So first of all, I want to challenge us, all of us, myself included, to be countercultural by choosing to follow Jesus. For this series, our main verse has been found in John chapter 14, verse 6. And I want us to just establish some context for that verse. And so that's why I'm going to read this very large passage of scripture for you that is on the screens. And this is Jesus answering a question from one of his disciples, because Jesus has said, I'm going to be leaving. And the disciple says, wait a minute, I don't know where you're going. And Jesus says, well, sure you do. And then this is the answer: no, we don't, Lord. Thomas said, we have no idea where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me, and if you had really known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Jesus replied, have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father, so why are you asking me to show him to you? Jesus in this passage is trying to give comfort to his disciples. There's a lot of uncertainty hanging over their heads. They have a lot of questions, but here's the thing. They have been walking with Jesus. They have seen Jesus perform miracles. They have built a relationship with Jesus, and yet they still have some cultural habits that are prohibiting them from actually seeing who Jesus actually is. And they're sitting here and they're worried about the future, and they're saying, God, tell us, Jesus, tell us how we're going to get there. They're begging him for a map. And Jesus' response to the disciples, whose cultural blind spots kept getting in the way, was to say this: I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And maybe we sit here and we want to be a little bit hard on the disciples, and we want to just go, no, duh, guys, he's right there in front of you. Listen to what he's saying. How many different ways can he say it to you? Here's the thing. Let's have a little grace. Because can we all be honest that we have our own cultural blind spots that lead us to say things like this? We say my way. We say my truth. We say it's my life. When John talked about religion, the way that our cultural blind spots prohibit us from really understanding who Jesus is we think it's our perception of truth, or even the things that we're going to do that are going to get us to where we want to go, right? And then in cults, we get it wrong, and we miss Jesus in that we think it's the way that they say that it's going to be. They tell us how to get to Jesus. Their truth is the truth that's better than all this other truth from the Christian faith. And so we miss Jesus in these ways. And here's the thing. The world is telling you very loudly to go your own way. Anybody heard that message even just this week? Go your own way. Or there's another message that we're hearing, and it's go this way, because we have this incredibly powerful celebrity culture that we have to contend with. They are now on our phones 24 hours a day telling us, hey, live like me, do like me, buy this like me. Don't you want to be like me? Go my way, right? Has anybody spent much time with kids? Anybody? Have you noticed this? What happens when they see something that they want and they can't have it? They throw a fit, right? I was in the nursery last week for one of our services, and I was in the baby room, which you would think this wouldn't be on display in the baby room, but for an hour I saw it play out right in front of me of like, I want this, no, you can't have this, and then we get upset because they want it their way, right? It starts in us at a very, very young age. We want what we want, when we want it, and how we want it. Anybody use GPS to get you from here to there where you're trying to go? Yeah, me too. I can't even remember how I got places without the GPS, right? But do you know and realize, or you've experienced, that GPS doesn't always account for like construction or road closures? But that's why God gave drivers brains, eyes, and discernment, right? For us to pay attention. Well, there's a story about a couple who unfortunately maybe didn't have any of those things. It's a German couple driving around Hamburg one night in 2006, and an 80-year-old driver was so dedicated to his navigation's know-how that he ignored a highway's initial closed for construction and then several other successive barricades, and he plowed right into a sand pit. We miss Jesus when we choose to insist on our own way, when we rely on our own faulty navigational system that can't see everything the way that Jesus sees it. When I was a teenager, I had grown up in church. I had parents who loved Jesus, who had taught me the way to go, who had made sure that I knew, do this and don't do this. This is right, this is wrong. Tried to, get me enfolded into church, community. I had faithful Sunday school teachers who were teaching me the right way. But when I was a teenager, I blew through warning signs after warning sign after warning sign because I wanted to do it my own way. There was something missing in my life that I had been told Jesus would fill and fulfill, and I had this thought that no, this is actually the way that is going to be filled in my life. I blew through the barricades, and then because of it, I suffered some health effects, and even beyond that, a lot of brokenness in my life, relationally, spiritually, and emotionally. We miss Jesus when we choose or insist on our own way. And so I want to ask you today, where in your life are you insisting on doing it in your own way? And how is that working for you? How is that affecting your relationships? If you've gone your own way, if you are going your own way, or if you have lost your way, if you feel alone, if your relationships are broken, if you feel alienated or isolated, the good news, you guys, is that there is always hope. Resisting the cultural draw to autonomy and overconfidence in our own judgment means that we choose to follow Jesus, means that we choose to make him the Lord of our life. It means that we recognize our need for God, a God who sees and knows everything and knows what you need. And that brings us back into relationship with God, and then it makes it possible for us to be in healthy and get life-giving relationships with people. So Jesus really does make a difference in our lives. And the difference that Jesus makes is that a lonely life, one that you're trying to live on your own, becomes a connected life with God the Father, the source of all life, the source of all wisdom, and then connection with other people who will encourage you and walk with you along the way. And so my encouragement to you is to be countercultural by choosing to follow Jesus and not just yourself. The world tells you follow your heart. I am encouraging you to follow Jesus. And secondly, you can be countercultural by choosing to give. We're just coming out of Christmas time, right? Are we all still recovering from Christmas? Yes, I'm still recovering from Christmas time. There's a lot of gift giving. There's a lot of gift receiving. It's a huge part of our season, right? And you could say that giving gifts at Christmas is part of our culture. But how does our cultural habit of individualism lead to our behaviors and values and beliefs getting a bit out of whack when it comes to Christmas? Well, all you have to do is look at the TV or TikTok or whatever else your source is of advertisements to see this cultural push. And that is to make these holidays come earlier and last longer than ever before. Have you ever asked yourself, why is that? Why is there such a cultural push to make Christmas in August? Right? Is it because the world wants to celebrate baby Jesus for half the year? No, you guys, that is not why. They want people to get more stuff, to want more stuff, to buy more stuff. Why? Think about it for just a minute. And also, they are trying to rewrite the natural rhythms of our seasons. So if you start celebrating Christmas in August, you skip over all these other wonderful gifts of seasons that God has given us that are part of our natural rhythms of life. And why are they doing that? In favor of the business bottom line. I mean, how early did Christmas land on the shelves this year? Really think about it. A second cultural push that I see is to now start buying for yourself at Christmas. Consumer Reports actually publish an entire page of products with this as the header. Let me read it to you. It's the season to treat yourself. Whether your idea of self-care involves workouts, freshly brewed cups of coffee, or winding down with a good book, we have you covered with a host of options from our tests at-home evaluations. The best part, you can feel good about any of these expert-backed items for yourself. The truth is, we all fall into it, right? It's a push, and it's really hard to resist, and then we wind up feeling like this. It's supposed to be a funny meme that says, when Christmas shopping for my friends and family ended up buying gifts for myself instead. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. Anybody? I know you don't have to raise your hand, but here's the thing. Christian tradition has historically embraced gift giving and receiving. I am not knocking that practice. I am just trying to hold up for us and say, how has culture and specifically individualism come in and distorted our perspective on that? It's meant to be a way of reminding us and for us to reflect on and then to celebrate God's incredible generosity to us in sending Jesus to the earth. That is what that is meant to represent. And the minute that it becomes something other than that, then it has become distorted by our culture. The gift of Jesus coming to earth was self-sacrificial. He gave up endless praise. He gave up all of the comforts of heaven, and he became a helpless little baby born in deplorable conditions so that he could come and be with us. That is what the gift giving is meant to represent. And we miss Jesus in this cultural phenomenon of gift giving and buying and receiving when it is no longer a celebration and reminder of that. When it becomes an overwhelming, overtaxing exercise in consumerism and gluttony and overspending and lust driven by me first attitudes. You don't have to raise your hand. But do you sometimes have a me first attitude? Even at the time of year where it's meant to be about giving gifts to others, we still struggle with this. And it is easy to get sucked into that vortex. And pretty soon we find ourselves doing things that don't line up with our values. Our behaviors then are dictating and driving our values. And that's where we miss Jesus. We miss Jesus when behavior determines our values rather than our values determining our behavior, if you think back to that graph that I showed you. When Jesus began his ministry, he made it a point to challenge status quo. His intention was to come and realign Israel's cultural priorities because they had gotten out of whack. They had become very religious. They had even started to miss the point of who God was, and they couldn't even see Jesus. And the point of there being a nation that unto God was going to bless them so that they could be a blessing to others. And they kept getting that misaligned in their hearts. And so Jesus came to do a heart change, which then would result in behavior change. And he told them what it meant to be his follower. He said this to his disciples: if you want to be my follower, turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. And the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus gave sums up what it looks like to turn from selfish ways, to take up your cross, and to follow Jesus. And so you guys, every time you share what you have with anybody who needs it, every time you love your enemies, every time you live a generous life, every time you tell the truth when it's hard, every time you act towards people the way that God has acted towards you, which is full of grace and mercy and kindness and love, every time you sacrifice something big for something good, you are living into what it means to be a follower of Christ, and you are living a countercultural, rebellious life. There's a passage in 2 Corinthians where Paul commends the church at Macedonia, and this is what he says: they did more than we had hoped for. Their first action was to give themselves to the Lord, to choose to follow Jesus, and then their second action was to give themselves to us. And you guys, last year at the end of the year, we challenged this church to live into the idea of giving and not getting. We challenged you to give $100,000, not just so it could go sit in the bank, but for a very specific reason, so that we could continue to live into our mission of loving God and loving people, so that through our community care ministry, we could feed 200 people on a Saturday morning. We could pass out food for people that they're going to eat off of for the rest of the week, so that we could warm homes with our firewood ministry. You gave money towards that. That was the challenge. It was also so that we could live fully into our call to the next generation, saying we will not sit by and watch them be picked off by the world. And you guys, you responded with passion and with generosity. We asked you for $100,000. Do you want to know how much you gave? $139,000. That is worth celebrating. And I have to tell you, that act of giving, that act of generosity was rebellious against what the world tells you every day, which is to get for yourself and to hold on for yourself, and that it's all about you and to follow your own way. Instead, you chose to live into the way of Jesus, the way of generosity, the way of giving, and it's exciting, and I am humbled to be part of this church. But God's not done yet. He's not done. And so our challenge is, how are we going to continue to live into Jesus' challenge to turn from our selfish ways, to take up our cross, and to follow him? The difference Jesus makes when we follow him is that an empty life becomes a meaningful life. And the final countercultural way that you can resist individualism is to die. There is a lot in our world that tells us, figure out how to live forever, right? We have these anti-aging creams, and we have all these vitamins, and we go see the doctor. There's people spending $2 million a year trying to reverse the aging clock on their body. Every culture since the beginning of time has been trying to outrun death. But here's where the radical, countercultural, supernatural nature of God's kingdom comes into play. Matthew 16 says this: if you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. Embracing death, not trying to outrun it, is actually how you're going to live forever. And how does that work? Because the God who created you didn't create you just to live here for 100 years and that's it. The God who created you to live for eternity with him. And so the way that happens is that we embrace a death to the sinful nature, the parts of us that say, I want it my way. The parts of us that say, I want to get what I can and hold on to what I have. We crucify those things with Christ, and we come to life in him. and we get to live for eternity. That is the message of the gospel. And that's what we're celebrating today. That's what baptism means. Anybody who belongs to Christ becomes a new person. The old life is gone and the new life has begun.